Thank you for coming, Mrs. and Mr. Darcy. Today we're going to be having an 8-hour course to help you fall in love. Mr. Darcy, I'm going to give you off to my assistant, Mr. Park. Would you like to come with me, Mrs. Darcy?
You say so.
So the purpose of this discussion is to work through how you fell in love and to help you fall in love again. I advise you to keep an open mind and to truly try to fall in love. So let's start where you first met him.
Well, I first saw him at a party. He and Mr. Bingley had moved into the neighborhood, and they ended up coming to the party. And he was the talk of the town, but he refused to interact with anyone. And at the party, I overheard Mr. Bingley ask him why he wouldn't dance with me, since I was alone. And he said, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me." Can you believe that? Tolerable?
This can be harder than I thought.
After that, he revolted me.
So, Mr. Darcy, we're going to explore the beginnings of your relationship with Elizabeth, and we'll see if we can revive your love. Tell me about when you guys first met.
We first met when I first moved to the country. I was really only going there with Mr. Bingley to stay with him for a few weeks as he moved out there. But within a couple days of being there, we were invited to a party. And I really did not care to go, but Bingley wanted to, and so we went. It was really country-like and unimpressive, the whole of it. I was told that I drew the attention of the room with my fine, tall person and handsome features. I mean, when was the last time I drew the attention of a room at the party? Well, anyways, the party was really just boring, except Elizabeth was there, and it was the first time I saw her, and there was just something about her eyes that really stood out to me. They were beautiful.
Elizabeth's eyes. Why do you think they were worth mentioning? Why were they the most important part of the party?
Well, they were just alive. It was like everything else was dim-witted and country-like, except her eyes. They could have been the most beautiful thing at any party.
I see. And do you still believe they shine today?
When she isn't glaring at me, yeah, for the most part, her eyes are still like that.
So you left the party feeling quite disgusted with Mr. Darcy. Would you say that was a misconception of him?
I mean, I married him, didn't I? So I suppose so. But then again, maybe not.
So what happened after that?
Well, there was a party at Netherfield where he danced with me, and I remember my friend asking me why I didn't fancy him, and I said, heaven forbid, that would be the greatest misfortune of all, to find a man agreeable that I was determined to hate. His wealth and good looks were very agreeable indeed, but my pride had already been stung by his, and I was determined not to like him.
And yet you danced with him.
Yes, I am puzzled to this day as to why I said yes. Maybe it was fated. I mean, we did fall in love and get married, so...
So, if I understand correctly, you danced with Elizabeth at the next party in Netherfield. If she was only, as you said, tolerable at the previous party, why did you ask for her hand at the next?
I couldn't get her eyes out of my head. They just tormented me every time I thought about her. I mean, every time I thought about that party, all I could think about was how beautiful her eyes were. And then her sister got sick and stayed with us at Netherfield for a while, and Elizabeth came over, and I realized how caring she was, and really, every day that she and her sister stayed with us, I grew to like her more and more, and...
So, you decided to ask for her hand at the next party?
Yeah, so the next time we had a party at Netherfield, because Mr. Bingley was so enamored with the party at... where was it? It doesn't matter. Anyways, he was so enamored with him that he decided to have a party at Netherfield, and so we did, and I took the time to ask her, but I took her so much by surprise that without knowing what she did, she accepted.
You must have really liked her back then.
Suppose I did.
So Lizzie, can I call you Lizzie?
I suppose.
So how did your relationship with Mr. Darcy proceed after the dance?
Well, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley up and left the country and went to town, which was quite heartbreaking for Jane, but I was quite glad to be rid of Mr. Darcy. I didn't see him again until I went to visit my good friend, Mrs. Collins at Hunsford, which is near Rosings. Darcy came to visit his aunt at Rosings, and we spent quite a lot of time in each other's company there. And though I still disliked him, he wasn't quite as revolting as before. That is, until he proposed.
He proposed.
Yes, and he started saying things like, "In vain I have struggled, and my feelings will not be repressed." And finally he said, "You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." You must imagine my confusion. I thought he disliked me and my country manners as much as I disliked him. And now he's saying he's always admired me and is in love with me and wants to marry me?
So, tell me about when you proposed to Elizabeth.
Well, we were at Rosings, and I saw her almost every day. And every day I fell even more in love with her. I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. And so it was towards the end, I was about to leave, and I went to her and I just laid myself out completely. And I proposed. And well, I'd never been so open with someone before who apparently disliked me so much that she said, "I had not known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world that I would be prevailed upon to marry."
And after she said that, do you feel like you still loved her?
Yes. Though my pride was shattered, my love for her prevailed even through the storm of her words. And so I went home and wrote her a letter, for she had accused me of things that I had to explain. And I wrote, "I demand your attention. Your feelings, I know, will be bestowed unwillingly, but I demand it of your justice."
So what happened after your refusal of the proposal?
Well, he wrote me a letter.
He wrote you a letter?
Well, in my refusal of his proposal, I confronted him with things like splitting up my sister and Mr. Bingley, and how unfairly he had treated poor Mr. Wickham. And that's when he wrote me the letter explaining himself, because I had been so blind to what had really happened. I grew absolutely ashamed of myself. Neither Darcy nor Wickham could I think of without feeling I'd been blind, partial, prejudiced, absurd. And that's when I started to love him. I didn't realize it then, but looking back now, I really did.
So he wrote you a letter and you went your separate ways. Surely that's not the end of the story.
No, the next time was at Pemberley. I was visiting with my aunt and uncle, and the house was to be empty. But Mr. Darcy came home early, and he was so respectable and handsome, and he had spoken in such terms of myself as to leave Georgiana without the power of finding me otherwise than lovely and amiable.
So, the next time you saw her was at Pemberley, is that correct?
Yes. She was visiting the grounds on the presumption that I was not home. However, my affairs brought me home a day early, and I ran into her. I met her, her aunt, and her uncle. Very nice people, and I talked to them for some time. It was at this time that not only was I falling ever more in love with her, but I think she began to fall in love with me. Later, she told me that it was gratitude. Gratitude not for merely having once loved her, but for loving her still well enough to forgive all the petulance and acrimony of her manner in rejecting me.
And do you still love her today, like you loved her back then? Do you have the same feelings towards her as you did back at Pemberley?
Yes, I suppose I do.
So when did you know you were really in love with him? Like, without a doubt, he was the man for you?
I don't know. I suppose it was when his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, came to talk to me. She kept asking and asking if we were engaged, and finally I told her no. And then she asked, "And will you promise me never to enter into such an engagement?" And at that point I realized I loved him, because I couldn't stand the thought of making a promise never to be with him. Thus saying, I will make no promise of the kind. And right then, I knew I loved him.
So if I were to ask you, will you promise me to divorce this man and never see him again, what would you say?
I would say, of course not, because I can't stand to live without him. When he paid for my sister's wedding, he said, "I believe I thought only of you. Oh, I do love him. I must go tell him."
How did you finally find out that she loved you?
Well, had she been absolutely irrevocably against me, she would have told it to Lady Catherine openly, but she didn't. And so I asked her to marry me, and she said,
There can be no doubt about that. It's already settled between us that we are to be the happiest couple in the world.
You interrupted me again. You know I hate when you do this. I was having a very private time between me and my psychiatrist, and you just barge in here and interrupt.
But I love you and I...
God, woman, just because you love doesn't mean you can go around being imprudent and rude.
I can't believe you. We came here to fall in love, and I have fallen in love with you, and you're just ruining it for me.
I'm ruining it for you. You're the one that barged into my session, my private time between me and my psychiatrist, and I'm ruining it for you. You're really ruining it for me right now.
The arrogance.
Sign the divorce papers.
Great, where's the pen?
Are we getting paid for this?
And there you have it, kids. The moral of the story is don't marry